look into it, we will be able to, yeah, it will be available.
Great. Takes about 5-10 seconds to get it going. Just one sec. Okay, you are live on YouTube.
Hello, Isaac.
Hello, how are you guys? Sorry, I was a minute late.
No worries, no worries. So Andres, you're live if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, so hello everyone.
Hey, Idris. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and you will handle this to me hosting. And if I would like to share, okay.
Yeah, you're host now, and you should be able to, everybody should be able to share their screen.
Yeah, okay, so I would start, I would like to introduce, first of all, guys, I would like to start. I hear somebody speaking, but I do not see. Ah, okay. It's an echo. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. We have our webinar at Hyperledger. David, I have a problem because I have very strong echo in my headphones. Do you know how to?
I'm not hearing any echo on my end. I don't know on your end. Maybe I'm not sure what might be going on.
Ah, sorry. I guess I know because. Yeah, guys, I understand. This is echo from YouTube. I open stream. So,
oh yeah. It's close the or mute the YouTube. Yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone, and today we have webinar at Hyperledger Vilnius. We welcome all virtually who are visiting Vilnius today in Lithuania. So we here at Lithuania we have regular Hyperledger project related meetups, and today it is my big pleasure to present our presenters who will talk about Hyperledger technologies. But what is more interesting, we'll talk about solution for suppliers management. And this is, I guess, especially for us in Lithuania, could be important part because significant part of Lithuanian industry, or let's say visible part of Lithuanian industry, is working as a suppliers for big manufacturers, especially nowadays when challenges to sign contracts or deliver some goods from Asia as a traditional suppliers. It is a tendency that Europe manufacturers looking near shore production facilities, and Lithuania, it is one of the place, and I hope such webinar which we will have today will support our exporters and will give understand what information to understand what is coming in near future, especially what is related to supply chain digitalization. I hope I pronounced correctly. So, Gigi, could you please introduce your team and stage yours?
Thank you, Andreas. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. I'm Gijo Joseph. I'm the Vice President of Blockchain Services at Chainyard. And I have two colleagues join here today with me, Isaac and Murali. Isaac, Murali, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Isaac Kunkel. I run our consulting services business. I'm based in Morrisville, North Carolina, which is basically the Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina. I work closely with Gijo on a day-to-day basis. Murali?
Hi, this is Mulisapa here. I'm Vice President for Engineering. And my main focus is TOIS in Chainyard on the blockchain technologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Murali. Thank you, Isaac. So what I would put the presentation into the PPT into presentation mode. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
See it well? Okay. Okay, thank you. So we structured the presentation into three parts. And the first part is, I would give you a brief introduction about Chainyard. Chainyard is a company who owns and operates, who created this Trust Your Supplier solution. And followed by Isaac would, walk you through the details of the solution, the business model mostly, and the current status of the Trust Your Supplier. And at the end, Murali will, give you a brief about the technology, which is Hyperledger, and used especially on the security aspect, on the data protection, and the privacy, and all those aspects, and a brief about the architecture. So to get started, Chainyard has been, Chainyard's parent company is called IT People Corporation. So we have been in the industry for the last 21 years. We were founded in 1999, based out of North Carolina, the beautiful place of Research Triangle Park. I mean, some of you would recollect Research Triangle Park is an upcoming technology area. So we started 2015. We started our blockchain journey when IBM started Hyperledger Fabric at their labs. So we were right across IBM. So we got very fortunate to work with IBM at the labs, doing the testing of the fabric, making all the quarterly releases. I mean, testing all the quarterly releases. So until recently, for the last 5 years, it has been Chainyard who is doing all the quarterly testing, performance, functional testing of the fabric. So we continued our journey and did many blockchain applications for IBM, as well as some of our customers like Deloitte and a few customers out of Europe as well. So in 2017-18, we had this idea about procurement issues, challenges faced by suppliers and buyers in procurement space. And we thought about creating the solution by ourselves. So we went again and met IBM procurement, IBM CPO, Bob Murphy. So he liked the solution, the approaches we suggested. So we partnered together. So Trust Your Supplier is a solution jointly by IBM as well as Chainyard. So Chainyard not only create the solution, our services side continue to develop digital transformation services in customer experience, blockchain, AI and automation, and cloud and DevOps, and the cybersecurity areas. So I kind of mentioned about this slide. I mean, we overall has done more than 36 blockchain solutions. I mean, and digital transformation, I mean, has been going on for the last 21 years, but very specifically to blockchain. We have a large blockchain team, 90 plus members. In a blockchain, that's a very, very big team compared to majority of the companies who has only few blockchain members, and 300 plus team working on the overall digital transformation. So we are a member of Hyperledger Fabric, Hyperledger, and last week the OpenIDL was announced, and we are part of OpenIDL as well. So over the period, we created many built-in components, many pre-built components which we could use in the Trust Your Supplier. So this is consistent with many of the consulting companies. We do consulting, engineering, and operations. The only thing which we are different from other services companies is the consortium building practice which we offer. So in any private enterprise blockchain world, right, you needed to create a consortium. You need to manage the consortium. You need to create the governance model of the consortium. Now you need to create the business consideration as well as technical consideration, like how do you add a member, how do you remove a member, who gets paid, who manages the node, like how do you ensure that smart contract is not impacted when you do an upgrade. Now all these aspects has to be considered when you are creating in a consortium. So we do the consulting of that. So that's brief about Chainyard, and I think Isaac can continue with Trust Your, very specific to Trust Your Supplier.
All right, thanks, Gijo. Hey, you guys, we have a pretty small group today, right? So feel free to stop me and ask questions or put your questions in the chat. We want to make sure you're taken away from this as much as possible, right? We're doing this so we can add value and help the Hyperledger ecosystem. Of course, we're happy to always talk about Chainyard and Trust Your Supplier, but we want to make sure Hyperledger ecosystem is growing, and we can do that by, sharing our information and learning from you guys as well. So anyway, thank you. So Trust Your Supplier, it really, yeah, thank you. So what is Trust Your Supplier? As the name sounds, it's all about establishing trust. And we call it Trust Your Supplier because it's really focused on buyer and supplier relationships, and bringing trust to that relationship. These relationships exist today. So we're trying to increase the amount of trust. We're also trying to ensure privacy and security of information. And lastly, we're trying to create a better way of doing certain parts of the business, which specifically are the supplier onboarding and supplier information management processes that take place today. Next slide. Gijo. So just real quickly, what does that process look like today? And I'm not going to read this to you, but basically there's a buyer or a category manager at a company is trying to find a supplier for a specific need, whether it be something in their manufacturing supply chain, or it could be something as simple as we need to get paper for our copiers and we're looking for new suppliers there. You guys know that big companies have lots of needs across the board. After they find a supplier, they have to qualify them as being able to meet their needs. And then the next part is to validate the attestations that the supplier has made in terms of their capabilities. And then once that's been done, they onboard, and then they move into what we call lifecycle management of the supplier. And this is really all about information management of the supplier and ensuring that they are maintaining any potential certificates that are required. So for example, if you have a company that's transporting chemicals for you, they have to have certain qualifications. They need to make sure that those qualifications are maintained. They want to make sure that their suppliers who are critical to their supply chain maintain financial that they stay in shape in terms of their finances, and they're not going to potentially go bankrupt and those kind of things. And so big companies and small companies alike are looking at their supply chains and trying to manage risk. And this is what the process looks like. Unfortunately today, because especially going all the way up to onboarding, this is an area that doesn't get a lot of attention in existing systems today. So what we see is a lot of pain points due to the current processes and technology. So let me just stop. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide just to explain how those inefficiencies are created. So what you have here on the right-hand side is a supplier. So a supplier has relationships with all of their buyers, right? And each of those today looks very different from one another. They're similar, but they're all different. They're different in terms of the timing of when they were brought in, how often they have to potentially renew, what questions and information they have to provide to that buyer. All of those kind of things are different, and that puts an onus on the supplier to keep up with that information, not only when they're onboarding and trying to get that first transaction, but throughout the life cycle of that relationship. And so if you're a supplier that's dealing with just a couple dozen companies, that's probably manageable, right? But what about companies who are dealing with thousands of buyers, and vice versa? What about buyers who are dealing with literally tens of thousands of suppliers? And those are the companies that are looking at Trust Your Supplier as a new and better way. And why? Because today's process is costly, slow, and inefficient. Why is it costly, slow, and inefficient? Because it's manual in many cases, because today often it's still email, spreadsheets, Word documents, and then it's a manual qualification to go through that data that's been basically on a spreadsheet or in a Word document. We see more and more pressure on buyers and suppliers from a regulatory perspective, and making sure that that relationship, they're adhering to all the regulations. I already mentioned the chemical transportation company as one example, being able to keep up with those kind of things. And that pressure is putting more pressure on procurement organizations. And in terms, it's putting more pressure on their suppliers to meet those neat requirements. Oh, can you go back, please? Gijo, can you go back? And the last thing is, because the supplier is dealing with these different threads and they're dealing with different systems, they're dealing with different processes, there's really no way today to leverage what you've done with one buyer from a supplier perspective to another. They are completely mutually exclusive, if you will. And so we saw an opportunity here. And we also saw an opportunity where blockchain can shine, and Murali is going to talk about that a little bit later. All right, next slide. So supplier pain points, redundant work. I just mentioned they're doing this for every one of their buyers, and to the level they have to do it to varies. It could be a very light process. It could be a very heavy process. What we found in all those processes is that we're looking at a 30 to 60 day onboarding process because of the way it works today and being manual in terms of the qualification, as well as just getting through the systems and getting into the system where you can actually be a verified and onboarded supplier to start doing that business. Another problem, and everybody has this, and we're all suppliers to some extent, right? We're always looking for customers, is trying to get noticed and trying to be discovered so you can find new customers. And that's another area that's a pain for all suppliers and everybody in business. But we also see an opportunity with Trust Your Supplier to help companies in that area. And we see that as a significant opportunity actually long-term as this network grows. That's one of the things where network effect of this blockchain network will really shine. And again, it's a costly process. It's manual, and you have to repeat it over and over and over and over for every one of those relationships. And that just adds up over time. So again, we're talking about companies that have significant number of buyers or customers, and each of those touch points being able to significantly reduce up to 90% of the time and overhead associated with maintaining those relationships. And on the buyer side, they have very similar pain points, right? It's a lengthy time, it's manual, they have to go through the discovery and qualification process, and they have to actually go in and qualify that the information that the supplier provided is actually accurate, right? Not everybody's above board. And this is part of managing their risks as a company. And again, the more important that supplier is to their supply chains, the more evaluation that goes on and the more risk management that takes place. And again, talking about tens of thousands of suppliers, this adds up, right? Some companies have teams of dozens of people who work on this full-time in terms of their procurement organizations, in terms of just the onboarding process and all those things associated with that process I described earlier. And it just takes time. And again, 30 to 60 days is being very generous. We've seen some longer, and of course some a little bit shorter. But what we're talking about is trying to reduce those time cycles by 75 to 90%. And that's what we're seeing in the market today. Next slide. So before I go into the slide, do you guys have any questions? I don't see any up there, but feel free if there's anything that's not clear or you have questions about the process or whatever, just shout out. So when we looked at all these problems and opportunities and how blockchain could be leveraged, we said, okay, can it be? Is there enough commonality in the onboarding process, specifically the data collection process, that we can be collecting that information and then potentially reusing it from relationship to relationship? And so we did an evaluation, and what we found after working, and this is where IBM was our partner. We worked closely with their procurement organization, who not only procures with their 20-something thousand suppliers, but they also do it as a business, as a service for another 50 large companies in the world. So they have lots of experience. And what we found is 50% of the questions right off the bat are common across, I don't want to say all, because that makes it sound like a lie, but most organizations. And then we found another 20 to 25% are common across the industry. Yeah, they may be worded a little bit differently, but when you get right down to it, they're asking for similar type information. Then you get to geography specifics, you get 10 to 15%. And then you have company or buyer specific questions. And we found that that was 5% or less. So we said, there's a great opportunity. And by the way, this pyramid of questions helps us in our solution to organize our questionnaires very similarly. So a buyer can then put together the right set of questionnaires, standardized questionnaires to use across their organization. And so we said, yes, there's an opportunity, and that commonality is what created the opportunity. Next slide. So what came out of this? The Trust Your Supplier solution. And I will tell you, like all good solutions, this one's been going around for a while. We're actually starting our 4th year of thinking about this solution. It's actually been in the market about 18 months now, but it continues to evolve and get better and better. It actually originally started as Know Your Supplier, right before it was actually out in the wild. So we called it KYS for a long time, very similar to KYC. But then we ended up with Trust Your Supplier after going through some marketing and branding exercises with IBM. Anyway, we're pretty excited about Trust Your Supplier. And what does it do? In the end, it enables a supplier to create a single identity, and we call that a digital passport. And they can share that with any buyer. Now, one of the things you'll see today is that data is still just data that the supplier has created. And how can they trust that data? Well, that's because we brought in third-party verifiers to the solution to verify this data. And these are the same providers who are doing this today, but it's more of a manual process for the procurement organizations and who are securing licenses with these companies to use that data for verification purposes. Because now the process has been moved from spreadsheets and Word documents, could you go back please, into a system, and it's digitized. So now we can automate certain things. So that information can easily be verified and then update it in real time. And if there's an issue, whether it's a verification issue or an update that causes a supplier to be out of compliance with certain rules, then those things are caught by the system and notifications can be set. And our buyers have the ability to trigger these things based on rules that they set in the system. And I mentioned the third-party verifiers are bringing data into the system. That data is now bringing the ability digitized data. It comes in, helps us automate certain verifications, brings in ratings to help manage risk. So again, these things were happening manually today, but now they're automated, and then we can provide scores based on a Dun & Bradstreet rating and a EcoVadis rating and a Rapid Ratings rating. These are things that companies are using today, and we can bring them all together and help create a risk profile automatically within the system. And one of the things before we go to the next slide is we can do this for suppliers even before they've ever established a relationship with a new buyer. So they can now go and a buyer can discover them and see that this potential supplier already meets all their needs, and based on some high level information that supplier has exposed for their organization. And I say it that way because suppliers control their own data, and they decide which data is exposed publicly and which data they want to share privately. And that's one of the things that blockchain enables. Next slide. So what's the ecosystem look like? Well, today it's primarily buyers, suppliers, and the third-party verifiers. Happy to say we also have some third-party developers who are now building on top of this. Most of those builders are building solutions that are tied closely with the verifiers. And there's a slide that we'll cover in a second, but most of these verifiers are providing a certain amount of data for free. And then of course, afterwards, they're selling that data just like they do today. But we have a nice integration layer that lets us pull those licenses right into the solution and again, leverage that data for automation and for automated verification. So it's really nice and makes this buyer and procurement organization's life much easier. We also see in the future auditors working in this network. I don't think we have any specifically today that are outside of the buyers' organizations. And then we do see certificate issuers in the system today. And some of those certificate issuers are verifiers already. For example, EcoVadis, there's different levels of sustainability ratings and certificates that they provide. And those badges can be associated with your digital passport based on establishing that relationship and getting that information pulled into your profile. So that's an example. So this is the ecosystem. We do think that over time we can see other organizations joining, many types of organizations. Think about insurance companies who provide certificates of insurance. That's usually part of a requirement of a buyer-supplier relationship. They could be part of this and bringing those certificates right into the network. And I could even see the day where that stuff is automated. So instead of today happening through email and requests, it could happen through a request through the system, and an insurance company could provide that automatically based on the insurance that that buyer has in place for, or that supplier has in place for their buyers. So it's a really great ecosystem, and we have a slide in a few minutes we'll show you that shows who's in the network today, and it's quite a list of good names. Next slide. So I mentioned the marketplace. So these companies like Dun & Bradstreet, EcoVadis, Rapid Ratings, and I will say there's at least another 9 or 10 that are part of the solution today, and I think there's another couple dozen that are lined up that would like to be part of the solution, but we can only handle integrations of so many at a time. Are part of this in bringing their data into the system to improve the ability to automatically verify and in the end manage the risks in these supply chains. I mentioned that most of these companies are bringing freemium models into the marketplace, but they are also then offering premium offerings. So that's why they're participating, because one, their customers are in this ecosystem, and two, it's giving them a new way to sell their data and their services that they haven't had before. And so that's why we have so many joining. And I'll give you an example. Dun & Bradstreet today sells licenses, all day, all night, but they usually are selling it to the buyers, and these are the big companies, and they have these big licenses. Now they're seeing an opportunity, and this is where a new business model is forming, that they can sell smaller licenses to the suppliers, information about the suppliers that they can pull right into their passport to give them a better profile. So when they are being exposed when they expose their information through this solution, they have a chance to do more business and increase their sales. And we see that as another really huge benefit for not only the verifiers, but also for the suppliers. And I'm going to just go off on a tangent here and tell you, like, every decision that's made in the roadmap, there's always the question asked: is this going to be valuable to all of our ecosystem members? And if something's not valuable to a certain ecosystem member, or worse yet, could harm that ecosystem member, there's a deep discussion that goes on to make sure that we assuage that issue and make sure there is value for everybody. And that's one of the core principles we've had since the beginning. And so going off on the last benefit here, I mentioned how we can automate the onboarding and the qualification process and all. We also are looking at pulling this data together to do more things with actionable insights. I mentioned the risk management profile already. There's many other things we can do, like tying into AI solutions that are scanning the web for potential nefarious information that could be bad, could reflect badly on a supplier, but more importantly, cause an issue to a big buyer. And we have seen that in the press over the last few years. And we can, with that, all this data and all these connections and all this digitized data, we can help automate many of those things. And we are tying into the AI in the back end for those insights. Next slide. So supplier benefits, I mentioned all these already. They have a single identity that they can share. Because they can share it, it eliminates redundancy of managing each of those relationships. I should say managing each of those relationships 100%, right? There's still always going to be that 5 to 10% with each relationship that they have to manage, but that significantly reduces their efforts. Suppliers own their own data. If I haven't stressed that enough, they own their own identity and they own their own data. So they decide what they're going to expose publicly to be discovered. And they just, as a matter of fact, a buyer has to, once they see a supplier and what they've provided, if they're interested in taking that relationships to the next level, they actually have to make a request to the supplier to see if they are willing to share more of their passport with them so they can continue to evaluate them. So sovereignty of data is important. I mentioned the new business opportunities. Of course, we're leveraging blockchain to ensure security and privacy of data and information. And then the marketplace. The marketplace, there really is no limit to how far it can go, other than we're just managing that to make sure that things that are added there are valuable to the ecosystem. But today we're only focused on onboarding and supplier information management, but we could see where this goes further down the road in terms of those relationships. And of course, the buyers have benefits too. Next slide. You know, back one. You know, very similar to the suppliers. They're reducing the lag time. They're reducing touch points. They're managing their risk better. They also have additional business opportunities. So it's very complementary to both sides of that relationship, buyers and suppliers. I already mentioned the third-party verifier benefits. All right, what does the ecosystem look like today? Oh. Yeah, so this is probably from March. I think it's fairly up to date. Probably noticeable, what's noticeable is we have recently onboarded General Motors, representing the automotive industry, to our governance board. Not all members of our governance board are completely onboarded to the solution yet, but they are all participating and have been for the last, many of these for the last year and a half in our quarterly meetings. And we're really proud of this network, and we're really happy where it's going from a governance perspective. In our last quarterly meeting, first quarter of this year, and we hope in the next one, which happens in 2 weeks, we've seen the governance board and these big companies starting to take a lead and drive the roadmap and have ideas. And the traction is tremendous. And I'm going to give you a real quick example. Vodafone earlier this year started inviting their suppliers to the network. And they actually created their own 30-second video that they shared with their suppliers of why they should be joining this network. Not only because they want them to and they're asking to do business more efficiently, but there's all the valuable things that I just mentioned. So when you see your governance board making those kind of investments and outlay to help this ecosystem, we really feel like we're headed in the right direction. You know, it's even though we've been doing this for 18 months, in many cases, it still feels like day zero. I'm sure Murali thinks differently since we've had like 3 iterations of the interface, the user interface and all, but it is a tremendous solution. And we're very proud of it. So I'm going to hand this off now to Murali to go into more about the technology. But maybe now is a good time to see if there's any questions. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat.
Yeah, please everyone, if any questions, we have good opportunity to ask people who are involved in global supply chain solution implementation, and definitely could share a lot of interesting and valuable information.
Yeah, it's a great point. It is a global solution, and today it's available in 70 countries. And this is just one network running for all 70 countries. So yeah, definitely global. All right, well, like I said, just shout out any questions. It's very small group, so we can certainly take that.
Yeah, we could be very open, but please do not forget that we have live stream on YouTube.
Got it, thank you. All right, Murali, all yours.
Thank you, Isaac. So Isaac has summarized what UIS is, but I just want to summarize it once again. It's a trusted network of buyers and suppliers and ecosystem partners, right? And when we're talking about these buyers and suppliers, we're also talking about the information that is being exchanged, the data that we are holding on behalf of these entities, right? When it comes to that, there is a lot of personally identifiable information that is stored on the platform. And there is also sensitive information related to the revenues or the banking. All those things are also saved. And the magnitude of this data, to get a picture, you can think about thousands of buyers and millions of suppliers, right? And the data of all these suppliers and the admins of those entities. All this information is being stored. And on top of it, we have deployed, like Isaac has mentioned, in 70 plus countries already. And we are going global, adding more and more countries as we speak. So when we do this kind of a thing, most of the enterprise application challenges, they apply, right? Some of them are related to the security. How do we engineer our network such that it is secure? And how do we scale, right? When we're talking about millions of these entities, we had to scale. And also, how do we make sure that business continuity is ensured, right? So all these things we're taken into consideration, and that is one of the reasons why we went with the blockchain. If you look at this following chart, you would see that without a blockchain in the picture, when these entities had to communicate, they either had to hold the data with them, right? The entity has to own the data and it should host it, as well as they had to share some of this information with others. So we get into shared databases, which are easy to hack. And also we had to rely on multiple intermediaries to validate this information. So with the blockchain, the single shared ledger, right, which would help us providing a tamper-proof solution. So this is a distributed ledger where the data is validated by all the participating organizations. So it is guaranteed to be valid, and you can always audit it anytime, and the records are immutable. So these are all the advantages that the blockchain brings into this solution. In essence, that makes us into a trusted, common, a single version of the truth. We'll get to the next slide. If you have any questions on any one of this, you can ask me immediately. Don't have to wait for the end. So all the advantages of the blockchain are realized. So we made sure that our solution leverages on all the benefits, including the decentralization or the transparency of the information, where any participating organization has access to this. But at the same time, we made sure that we encrypt the information so that it is not compromised easily, right? And immutability of the records is always there. We'll go to the next slide. When we talk about data, like I said, we are holding a lot of personally identifiable information, right? And there is a lot of sensitive information related to the business operations. Like the ownerships or the locations or the payment data, everything is there, right? So data is one part, and normally we talk about security and privacy as one thing, but if you look at it, we had to layer them, right? This data has to be made secure. That is the first step, right? When we talk about security, we are talking about unauthorized access to the data, right? We are talking about protecting against malicious threats. So the data security has to be both, we had to make sure wherever the data is hosted, that physical location is secure, right? And as well as the computing infrastructure that is hosting the data, that also has to be secure. On top of it, the network where this application is running and accessing all the data, that has to be secure. So under the security, you'll see we had to take into account a lot of things like sanitizing or so one of the major requirements with the PII information is when a party which owns the data, like Isaac has mentioned, the data is sovereign, right? The entity, either a supplier or a buyer, they own their data and they decide whom to share the data with. So when that kind of a requirement is there, if a party wants to get out of the network, we had to make sure the data is cleansed and it is no longer accessible, right? We had to make sure the data is encrypted, backed up, so that whenever there is a problem, we will be able to recover the data. And we had to make sure all of our development machines, so they have policies for the removable media. And the data, again, we are talking about data from multiple organizations kept in the same system. So we had to make sure it is properly segmented and isolated from each other, right? The sharing is by the organization's consent only. And we also had to take into account the malware management. So we integrated a set of tools into our application, which continuously checks for any data that is uploaded into the system for any virus signatures. And we also take care of checking these kind of malware checks on all the data, that is all the modules that we are using, the application modules that we are using. And also make sure that we are patching and keeping this system up to date, right? And on top of it, we also do penetration testing and source code, static code analysis of the code to see if any patterns of code that is vulnerable for this kind of hacks. So some of these things we had to take into account for security, right? Once the data is secure, we get into the privacy concerns, right? When we have deployed it in multiple countries, we had to take into account the compliances, the regulations and compliances of all those countries, right? European Union has one set of regulations, whereas California has another set, and now Brazil came up with its own set of regulations for data access. So we had to put policies in place so that we don't share the data, right? We use the data responsibly, right? We don't use it for any marketing or any other thing, or we don't publish the data to unauthorized entities for mining. Right, we take into account the sensitivity of the data, so we make sure it is processed and it is stored and transmitted in accordance with all these policies and compliance rules, right? This also includes the data that is used for discovery. Like when we talk about multiple buyers, and one of the value propositions that we are giving to our buyers is the ability to discover suppliers who are dealing with a particular product or who are operating in a particular region, etc. So when a buyer discovers a supplier, we show only the information that is not part of any of these sensitive data. And once they establish a business relationship with these suppliers, that is when the entire data is accessible to them. That data includes the information that the answers to the questionnaires that the buyer has given to the supplier, which we have talked about earlier, right? And we also make sure that the data is classified and the consents are captured. Like when a supplier shares the data with a buyer, we make sure that the consent is there. And when we talk about the third-party validators and others, we are also very careful about the data that is exchanged with these third parties to make sure none of this data is compromised. So this comes into the privacy part of it. That's how we made sure that the data is secure and privacy is ensured. We'll get to the next. Any questions on the data privacy or security? If not, we'll go to the next slide. So using yeah, we'll go to the next slide.
We have two questions on our chat.
Okay.
Would you like to answer now?
Yes, please.
When you talk about P2, what do you collect? Do you collect individual P2 or business P2?
We do both.
Maybe
PII.
PIA. Sorry.
Yeah, right. We do both. It's a personally identifiable information we're talking about, right? So for instance, in case of the business is operating in a particular location. It may have offices in a set of locations. So all that location information is one of them. And when it comes to the persons who are marked for managing those entities, the admins of those entities, right? We have the email information, we have the first name, last name information, etc. And when a supplier establishes a business relationship with a buyer, right, as part of the questionnaire, they'll be exchanging information related to their financials, last 3 years of financial information, for instance, or their ownership, like if it is a corporation, right, if it is a privately owned or it is publicly owned, and who owns what percentage of that corporation, all that goes into that, and the contacts related to those entities. So it's both the business.
It is second part is also what is payment data. Maybe
right, payment data. That is because a supplier, right? Right now, the way TYS is structured is it is there is a subscription fee for the supplier, so they had to enter the payment information. This is one part, and then for the buyers also they had to provide the payment information, so that when that is taken into their ERP and other stages for doing the business, like the bank account information, for instance.
Okay, no more questions. No more questions. Please continue.
Okay. Like I said earlier, this is nothing but an enterprise application, but with a stringent data-related requirements, right? So we leveraged IBM Blockchain Platform for all its capabilities, including the disaster recovery or backups and things like that. On top of it, we made sure that we build security into the solution, right? It's not an afterthought, but we architected such that security as well as the scalability are built into the solution, because we know that we'll be dealing with millions of these entities. So that's one part of it. And when it comes to the leveraging the blockchain capabilities themselves, you'll see that we had to make use of everything, including the channels and the certificate authority that is provided by the IBM Blockchain Platform, so that the data related to a buyer or a supplier is encrypted with the certificates that are owned by them. And we also made sure that we deployed this application in multiple regions and zones, so that if any one fails, we still have access to the network. And wherever possible, we have utilized open source components. That's to make sure that we can build it faster and securely. The other thing that we did is when it comes to the identity management or access management, we also made sure that we can integrate into an entity like a buyer's SSO. So the buyer admins can log in with the same credentials as their organizational credentials. Any questions on the principles?
Just one, it is one question. I would like to listen about Oracle issues if there is some approach. Oracle, it's about Oracles in blockchain, or Oracle in as a company and data provider, databases provider.
So
is it clear for you, the question?
No, it's not clear.
I think it is Oracles in blockchain, you know, someone reporting all the data.
So there are no issues as such there, right? We're compliant with. So is there anything specific? Or alternatively, you can send us an email and we'll reply to that.
Yeah.
There's a question about oracles, Murali.
Right, but what is the question about?
Okay, it's update. In terms of some approach without Oracle protocol, like a band or chain link. Chain in link.
Chain link. I'm not sure about it. Like,
Yeah. But
any considerations
we
that you
don't
have
use an Oracle like chain. Let me, Murali, I'll take this. We don't really use an Oracle like Chainlink. I understand that concept. But if you think about it, the third-party verifiers are they're like the oracles, right? They're providing the trusted data and then helping to validate the data before it ever gets written into the system. So that's, I would view them as the oracles, each with their own specific set of trusted data that they can help with us with verification. If that makes sense.
Okay, got it. I got it. So the way
one small note, sorry, I guess we had only 6 minutes to the end of our webinar, so please pay attention to that.
So for the verification, it is not the chain code as Isaac pointed out, but the third party does the verification and provides that the information, which we store. We'll go to the next slide quickly. So the left-hand side, you have the TYS application access, right? We have a service layer that we use to access the application, and that accesses the blockchain API to get to the IBM cloud, IBP. And we also have a key management solution that we are using from the IBMs, which we use to encrypt the data in the MongoDB. There are two, there is off-chain data and there is on-chain data. In order to be compliant with the GDPR, etc., what we did was none of the PI information is put on the chain. Instead, we put it in the MongoDB, encrypted with the keys of the buyers and the suppliers. So you'll see a off-chain database, and also the digital identifier service, which can validate a ID that is specified, or an API layer, right, that can be used to integrate into the third parties, including the buyer's ERP systems. So that's only a high-level view of it. On top of it, we also have this deployed in multiple zones and regions, and we make sure that the firewalls and other things are all put in place, right? And a monitoring solution using syslogs, sysdiag, and logDNA and other things are in place. The internal communication is all made secure using TLS, as well as using whitelisting to make sure that it is not compromised. Any questions on this?
Here on the chat, I will fix it again. One question about, could you please use microphone maybe to ask your question? I guess it will be more appropriate way.
Hello.
Hello, please.
Hi.
Hi. Let me introduce myself firstly. My name is Haesu Lim from South Korea. Yeah. What I wanted to know about Chainyard, what Chainyard try to approach has own solution about Oracle solution. only that, without band protocol or chain link protocol.
So if it is just the smart contracts, right, we can put it on any blockchains. Chainyard would be able to help you with that. Isaac, do you want to take that question? We have consulting assignments
Yeah,
around.
I think I think the question is, what was our motivation for doing it this way, as opposed to like a public blockchain? And I think the answer to that is, in the state of where blockchain is today, especially acceptance with big enterprises, it still needed to be considered to be a more private, because of the concerns around data privacy. Even though we all know you can trust blockchain, but companies don't necessarily trust it, and there's the regulatory environment as well. So we thought that this is a great first step, and of going with a private blockchain and using our own ways to verify the data with third-party verifiers who are already part of the process. So it wasn't a complete revamp of the solution, but just I would say a modernization of how it's being done to add the efficiencies.
Oh, actually, I didn't want to embarrass you guys. Actually, I just only wanted to know, anyway, if someone used private blockchain in supply chain, definitely, I guess there's a lot of problem about Oracle issues. So I actually want to listen about that firstly. That's all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. Any more questions? Because our time is almost over. So any last sentence from you, Isaac, or anyone else? And I guess if no more questions, we could close. So please, a final word from you, Isaac.
Sure. I just wanted to say thank you to Hyperledger and the meetup group in Vilnius for allowing us to share our journey and experience. And we're always willing to spend time outside of this call with anybody to help you with your journey, or as was just noted, help you with your projects if you have something you need help with. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Also, thank you, Chainyard, for letting us know and the introduction of Trust Your Supplier solution. As I mentioned at the beginning, big part of Lithuanian industry is acting as a suppliers. So I hope this webinar will be very useful for part of our supply chain industry. So thank you very much, Isaac. Thank you, Gijo, and all of you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
and I'll get this on the YouTube channel right after this.
Bye.
Thank you.